Good evening, and welcome along to the show. This week I'm going to be joined by broadcasting legend George Jones. He'll be telling us all about his brand new book, Amazed. We've got 60s superstar Gary Puckett is on the show as well. Chesney will be telling us about the Solid Gold 60s tour, which comes to Belfast and Derry sometime very soon. And we'll have live music in the studio from singer-songwriter Gareth Dunlop. But starting things off this evening, we're talking theatre, and it's been a great year for the Lyric Theatre here in Belfast. They just won 2 massive UK Theatre Awards, so well done to them. And the current show running at the Lyric is Big Man. Paul McVeigh is the writer, and Paul joins us now in the studio. Paul, how are you?
Good, thank you. Nervous.
Yeah?
Yeah, they had the preview tonight and then the opening night tomorrow night, so yeah, I'm pretty nervous.
And the nerves is because you haven't done a play in quite some time, have you?
It must be 25, 30 years. I mean, I wrote plays, and then I started writing comedy in London, and I did that for about 10 years. But I would be working with like one stand-up comic and working with them on their sort of shows for Edinburgh, where they were going and platforming their skills and sketch writing and things. And then I just gradually went more and more into writing for myself and writing short stories and writing for Radio 4 short stories, and then a novel. And so it's like I've gone back in time. It was something to do with lockdown. Something weird happened to all of us, I think, in lockdown. And for me, it was going back to writing this play.
So is Belfast home now?
It is. I moved back about 5 years ago, and so I've come back. I've been living in Belfast, living very close to where I was brought up, and spending time with my family. And that's it. I don't think I'm going to go back to the big smoke London.
Everybody should do London once, but there is a time you have to leave, isn't there?
It's a young man city, young person city. Because like I used to at some points the jobs I was doing, it would take me 2 hours to get to work.
Yeah.
And 2 hours to get home. And your quality of life on that respect you lose out on, but in other respects like disco dancing and carrying on, that's quite fun over there. And then the big museums and the art galleries and all those kind of things are fantastic. And I loved it, I have to say. But I'm quite happy now to not live there.
Okay, tell us about Big Man then. It's a love story to begin with, isn't it?
Yes, it's a love story. I kind of, I had this when I came back. I really noticed that this expression, big man, I'd never heard it before.
Yeah.
And I thought, when did this come? Who invented the big man saying? And also, what does it mean? Because people obviously just take for granted sayings that they've known all their lives or that people use every day. And I sort of really started listening to when people use big man, and it's sort of a mark of respect. And people would say, "All right, big man," or and then I really thought about it, and I thought, would someone say that to a gay man? Would someone call a gay man a big man? And I really started asking, like, what does it mean to be called a big man? And can you be a gay man and be a big man? Yeah. And I actually think that probably very few people would use it to a gay man. And then why would that be? So what qualities make a big man? And I think I wanted to look at what I think are the real qualities of a big man. What makes a big man? All
right, that's pretty shocking and hard-hitting in places, isn't it?
Well, I think that what I wanted to do, to be fair, I wanted to be really honest about 2 men falling in love. And I'm from a working class background, and I wanted to write about 2 working class men who fall in love and what their experience, how it influences their relationship, but also that there's an age gap as well. And the older guy, he's 50, and he lost people through the Troubles, lost people through the AIDS generation, and then through just being older, lost his parents. And the younger fella, he's 30, and he's lost most of his friendship circle through suicide. So it was a way of I was really shocked when I moved back and I heard about the whole suicide epidemic, because it's not reported on over in London. So I was going, why didn't I know about this? And I want to write something about it to sort of bring more attention to it. And also, how can I, as a writer, try to talk about this issue, because it's hard to imagine what's going on in someone's head to make them do that. Yeah. But what if I talked about the people who are left behind? What is it like for them? And so these 2 people maybe on the surface shouldn't be together, but what they both have in common is that they have suffered a lot of loss.
Yeah.
And so this loss is a sort of emptiness, that they meet each other and they're loners, but this love happens between them, and they understand each other in ways that just other people can't understand. There's like a language that you have from loss that just if someone hasn't experienced, they really don't know, what it's like. And one of the lines in the play is, what people don't tell you about grief is that the dead take you with them.
Yes.
The you that they knew is buried with them, because you will never be that person again. So, and then if you experience multiple losses, and especially if they happen in quick succession, you're never really fully formed before the next one comes along, and so you don't actually know who you are anymore.
Yeah.
And you're sort of like a half-formed person, and so, but love can be this incredible healing experience, and that's what they experience.
30, 40 years ago, it would have been very difficult for two men in working class areas to have a relationship and fall in love.
In any kind of areas.
Yeah.
I mean, in Belfast particularly. I remember growing up, I think there was a gay bar. It was only gay but after 9 on a Saturday night, and that was the only bar in Northern Ireland as far as I know. And it wasn't even officially gay, and they used to stand outside in groups and beat you up when you left. And so it was a dangerous thing to be gay. And one of the things it talks about in the play is that it's really hard for straight people to understand what it's like to live a life where you put your life in danger, actually, if you hold your partner's hand.
Yeah.
If you show any kind of affection in public place, you could have been spat on.
And we're still getting that in 2022.
It's 2022. We talked about it just earlier on off camera. But someone nearly beat to death recently, and yet people say, "Oh no, don't you have everything now? You have your pride, and what are you complaining about? You've got your marriage. What are you complaining about? Yeah, but how did we get it? We got it through the back door. We didn't get it because we should." But apart from that, there is homophobia and there's violence. And so when you're brought up in life, what impact does that have on a gay relationship? Well, why are they so brief and why do they last? Well, maybe partly because they have to be hidden and secretive, and they don't have the language of touch, and they've all of those things that are forced upon them, and so it just touches on how these two people end up. They end up. The young fella can't articulate himself very well. And I think that's part of why people perhaps choose things like suicide, because they can't express what's going on.
And especially here in Northern Ireland, you think of the suicide figures here, for the size of our little country, they're serious, aren't they?
Well, apparently, we're the highest in Europe, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, I think one of the things in this, in the play, what they do is that when they can't speak, and this kind of language of loss that they have, they just hold hands, and it's a really kind of revolutionary thing to just hold someone's hand. Like, who would have thought that was an incredibly political thing to do, or a really challenging thing for some people, just to see two people expressing this tiny little thing that you would take for granted even as a small child or a teenager when you're first dating someone and you hold their hand. And you're not allowed to do that. You have to hide it. They have to hide it underneath their legs in a taxi, or they have to, all that stuff. And so it's that maybe just trying to bring to light for people, just for little glimpses into what impact these kind of things have that you wouldn't even notice or see.
It's not all doom and gloom. There's some humor in the play as well, isn't there?
Yes, I think love is this really powerful thing that they're both really swept on, and their love language is laughter, and I think that's a real part of Northern Ireland. As much as there's this kind of darkness, there's this flip side, to that. And I think that their relationship is that, they just laugh so much that they, he says at one point, he says, like, it opens these kind of connecting doors between them, and it's just always a part of their relationship, this laughter. And that's the thing that keeps them together, and that kind of keeps getting referenced throughout their relationship, and even when things change in the status of the relationship.
You've got a great team working on the show with you, haven't you?
Yeah, I know. I've got Tony Flynn, a wonderful actor. He works with the Belfast Ensemble a lot. He was the lead in The Abomination, and he is. I actually wrote it for him.
Right.
So we when I moved back, he had just moved back from Dublin after being away for over 20 years from West Belfast. And I just moved back after being away in London for over 20, 30 years. Both creatives, both the same age, both working class, both gay, So we met up through mutual friends, and we just became buddies. And then so lockdown, we ended up being in each other's bubbles. So, and now I start writing this thing, and then I ended up writing it specifically for him. So, I mean, it's wonderful. And I saw the dress rehearsal last night, and he's absolutely stunning in this role. And then Patrick is just an incredible director, and he's brought, like something really special to it. I couldn't imagine what it was like to see what it was like. So last night I was like, oh my God, the set's amazing. The lyric, the staff of the lyric are fantastic. Jimmy Fay, the artistic director, and I mean, it's just been a real honor, really, to have my show on there.
Excellent. Now you run right through until the 13th of November, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, 13th of November. Yeah, I'm so nervous.
Really?
Yeah. Yes, it's going to be interesting. I was actually thinking about wearing a disguise. I was actually seriously, if I could sit in the back with kind of a really long beard and a kind of hats and maybe some ringlets or something, and just, just to see what people are kind of, whether they like it or not, whether they're going to throw things at me or, I don't know. I'm looking forward to it, but in a very scared way.
Okay. Are you thinking about the next project already?
Yes, I'm working. I've just handed in I'm doing a 10-part series for BBC Radio 4, which is 10 short stories, and it's called The Circus, which is about Cliftonville Circus in North Belfast, which is very near where I live. And there's 5 rows off the circus, so it talks about these families who all live off the circus in different religions and different backgrounds and social classes, and then an overarching story through these 10 short stories, in which I think is airing in this, they're recording, end of November, and it'll air in January.
Excellent. We look forward to that. We look forward to Big Man as well. I'm coming to see it. I'm looking forward to it. And happy birthday as well.
Oh, thank you. Only 24. That's just bad lighting in here, that's all. All right, thanks very much.
Paul, good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you like the music from the 1960s, there's a massive show on the way to Belfast and Derry, the Solid Gold 60s Tour, featuring some of the biggest acts from that great decade of music. It comes to the Millennium Forum on the 5th of November, and also the Ulster Hall here in Belfast on the 6th of November as well. One of the stars joining the lineup is Chesney Hawkes. Of course, his dad, Chip Hawkes, was a member of the Tremolos. Chesney's going to be on tour with the band, and I'm pleased to say he joins us now on the line. The one and only, see what I did there? Chesney Hawkes, how are you?
I'm good, mate. How you doing, Robin?
I'm good. Now, obviously, you've been a regular visitor to Belfast over the years. In fact, the last time you were here was Let's Rock in Northern Ireland. That was a great gig, wasn't it?
Yes, that was a hell of a day, that one. I spent the whole day with Toyah. We met up at the airport, and actually she came to my house. She came to my house. We traveled to the airport together, traveled to the show, did the show because we were back to back, and then came back and traveled back together. It was hilarious. I highly recommend 24 Hours with Toyah.
And then you appeared on her famous Sunday lunch thing with her husband Robert as well, didn't you?
I was, yeah. I'm honoured to be the only guest they've ever had on the show. So yeah, that was fun. If anyone's interested in seeing that, just go and look at Toyah's YouTube. It's something to behold.
So what's it like backstage then on one of those gigs with so many 80s legends?
Well, those shows are great because I'm 90s, as you know, but for some reason I've been adopted by the 80s fraternity, and I'm like the younger brother of all the guys, because they're all now kind of like in their early 60s, whereas I'm in my early 50s now. So I mean, I've known them all for so long. Obviously Nick Kershaw's an old mate of mine from years gone by, and we're really good friends. But people like Toyah, obviously, Holly Johnson, Howard Jones. I mean, all these, so many. Carol Decker. I could go on. Peter Cox from Go West, Midure. I mean, just so many people. Tiffany, that we've all become, kind of a tight knit community, really. And it's like a little reunion, and we just have a laugh and catch up, and obviously the shows themselves are just so fun. Nostalgia seems to be a big thing right now, and that's kind of, funnily enough, a good link to what I'm doing right now, which is the 60s Gold Tour, and I've taken over from my old man, who was the lead singer of the Tremolos.
Now, I know your dad, the legendary Chip Hawkes, hasn't been too well at the minute. How's his health?
Yeah, well, he's had this form of cancer called multiple myeloma. I don't know if any of your listeners would know what that is, but it's a bone and blood cancer, which you can kind of live with, but you have to brutally treat. So you never know what kind of day he's going to have, So it was what we decided to do is put a band together as the Tremolos that could theoretically do it without him, and he'll make the shows that he can make, if you know what I mean. So that's what we've been doing, and it's been quite an amazing time, really. I'm honored to be filling the big shoes of my old man.
So there's a fabulous lineup on this Solid Gold 60s tour, and at the moment all the radio bosses are telling us that people don't want to hear 60s music on the radio. Those guys have got it wrong, haven't they?
Oh, they've totally got it wrong. I mean, I don't know where that comes from, Robin. I mean, we've noticed that all of the shows up and down the UK so far have been pretty much sold out. And I mean, what happens is obviously the target demographic are the people that were there in the 60s and that loved the music. But they bring their kids with them. So there's a generation of people that are coming of our age. And even younger, sometimes the grandkids come, and they know the songs. They know the songs. You forget, like, I mean, we're touring with Jerry Pacemakers, we're touring with the Searchers, Herman's Hermits, Gary Puckett, Marmalade, all these amazing artists from the 60s and 70s that had so many big hits. And like you forget, if you watch this show, it's literally, I mean, every single song played through the 2-hour show is a #1 hit. It's
And back then when you were growing up, were all those guys always around you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very rock and roll household, as you can imagine. My dad was like in the Tremolos. My mum was a game show hostess and actress, and so there were guitars propped up in every corner. All these guys are like, my brother and sister and I, like, we call them our uncles,
Yeah.
So we're actually touring with people that we've known since we were kids. It's it's fun. It's fun.
And then, of course, you would have your own success. 1991 is a year you will never forget, all thanks to the song The One and Only. We mentioned Nick Kershaw wrote the song, of course, as well. So what's your memories of the year 1991 then?
Like being in the eye of a storm, to be quite honest with you, because one minute I was playing piano in pubs around my area, and the next minute I was selling out arenas and #1 all over the world. So it was a pretty crazy, very fast, meteoric rise. But I have great memories of those times. I got to travel the world and see some amazing places and play some great places. And I had my little brother with me on the drums, and he's still on the drums with me now, playing when we do our live shows, but also, like, doing the tremolo stuff.
And of course there was the movie as well, Buddy's Song, where you got to work with another legend, Roger Daltrey. What was that like?
Yeah, Roger was wonderful and gave me a lot of great advice in those days. Mainly, never come off the road. Always play live, which I took to heart. My dad always told me that as well. I toured with some great people in those days that said the same thing. Bryan Adams, Huey Lewis. I mean, I even met McCartney and George Harrison and Eric Clapton in those days. And everybody, without fail, said the same thing. Make sure you always play live. Stay on the road.
Yeah.
So I did, and it's kept me in good stead, I think.
So having all that fame at such a young age must have been great, but then comes the low points when you were dropped by your record label for whatever reason. That must have been a huge disappointment.
Yeah, I was so young, Robin, when that all happened. It's I forget kind of how young I was. I was basically, if you look at it, I was kind of like a washed-up pop star at 23, or supposedly. I don't believe that at all. But I literally 2 years before that, I was #1 and all over the world and everything, and it was it was crazy to think that. That it can happen in that way. But what's happened for me, I'm very glad and happy to have experienced those kind of highs and lows of the business, and I feel in life in a way. And I've actually mentored quite a few young artists over the years on the kind of downfalls in that, and the fact that none of it's real, if you know what I mean. So back in those days, obviously it was everything, to have success and hits and everything else. But for me now, priorities change, and of course that's what happens as you get older. And my priorities are my children and my wife, and just general happiness. And you don't realize what is actually important in life until you get a little older. But of course it affected me, in those days. I don't think I realized it at the time and didn't really deal with it until later on in life. But glad to have actually been through it. As I said, it's life is a rich tapestry that we weave, and I just happened to experience quite an extreme thing at a very young age, which I think didn't define me. I made sure it didn't define me. I made sure that it helped me help other people as life goes on.
And how do you feel about being called a one-hit wonder? Because you do have a box set out at the moment that has 112 songs on it, hasn't it?
Well, it's funny. As I said before, I touched on the fact that it's very easy to be defined by one moment in your life. And when people ask me about that, I just say, well, if you think about your life when you were 19 years old, would you like your whole life to be defined in that particular moment? I think most people say, hell no. I understand the mantle and I understand where it comes from. I think that the title of the song didn't help, but I never stopped making music. Once an artist, always an artist. I never thought that my career was over or anything at that point. And I still have a very loyal, wonderful fan base that still comes to see me live and still buys all my records. And I've made a load of records since then. And I realized that a lot of people will only know me for that song, but. That's why I'd put the box set out. I wanted to kind of, collate everything in my career. So there you go. Anyone that thinks I'm just the one and only, go and do a little research.
Exactly, and I've been playing the John Lennon track. John Lennon lived here.
Oh, wonderful! Well, thank you. So you're a rarity in that respect, but I really do appreciate when people know my other songs.
So where's home for you these days? Because you did move to LA, didn't you?
Yeah, I actually still live in Los Angeles, but because I'm back and forth so much, especially in particular to the UK, I still count this as home, but I guess home is where your love is, and my wife is in LA at the moment, so I guess that's home.
And there is an interesting story how you met your wife. You met in a bar, didn't you?
We did. Well, it's funny when I wouldn't call it an interesting story. I mean, we just met in a pub, it was on the 4th of July in London. She's American, so it meant a little more to her, but I was just going to see a friend of mine play guitar or support him because it was kind of a crappy little pub. And he was like, please come. Otherwise it's just going to be, that obligatory two old men in flat caps and a Jack Russell. And so I did. I went and sat at the bar and for some reason, my wife and one of her American friends decided to celebrate 4th of July by going to the Edinburgh Castle in Mortlake. And it's like, God knows why, but I'm glad she did.
So you're coming to Derry and Belfast the 5th and 6th of November. Will you be doing all the big Tremolos hits?
Yes, absolutely. We're, as I said before, it's just all hits. The show is amazing. The bands are wonderful, and I think it's going to be a bit messy that night actually, because there's probably 40 blokes, and mostly in their 70s and early 80s. And it's the one time in the whole tour we're doing, I think it's a 35-date tour, but it's the one time in the whole tour where we're all together in one hotel room. So God knows how that's going to go.
So is it going to be complete rock and roll mayhem then?
I think, you know what, they're way more rock and roll than any of the kind of 80s and 90s fraternity that I've toured with over the years. The 60s guys, they know what they're doing, and it's full of pranks and all sorts of practical jokes, and they're crazy, honestly, and they do know how to drink.
And what about you back in the day? Did you have any rock and roll mayhem?
I had my moments, my boy next door image would have been tarnished if I told the truth.
And I remember back in the day as well, you were on the front cover of Smash Hits magazines and all those kind of magazines back then.
Yeah, it was. I think there was at one point where I was the most photographed man in the country. It's Smash Hits was my second home at that particular moment in life.
And do you have any good memories of playing Belfast before?
Do you know what? Every single time, Belfast is well renowned as like the greatest crowds in the UK for sure. In Europe, to be honest with you, I mean, no matter what, if you're playing Belfast, you know you're going to have a good gig. So I'm always excited to come to Belfast, and it never ever ceases to amaze me at how great the crowds are, and they never disappoint. So I'm so excited.
Well, Chesney, it's been great talking to you. The Solid Gold Tour comes to the Millennium Forum in Derry on the 5th of November, and also the Ulster Hall here in Belfast on the 6th of November, with of course the Tremolos, Spencer James of the Searchers, Jerry's Pacemakers, Marmalade, and Gary Puckett as well. It's going to be a great gig. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for joining us.
You too, man. Great to speak to you. Thanks for having me.
Right, still to come, we'll be chatting to Gary Puckett, who of course had massive hits back in the 60s with songs like Young Girl and Lady Willpower. Broadcasting legend George Jones will also be with us shortly, telling us all about his brand new book, Amazed. But before that, let's have some live music in the NVTV studios. And Gareth Dunlop has got a big gig coming up at the Empire on the 11th of November. His current album, Animal, is out right now, and here he is performing live with A Kind of Paradise. Here is Gareth Dunlop.
Don't need sun on my skin, or salt on the breeze. The camel storms within, I set my soul at ease. 'Cause I found heaven in your eyes. It's my kind of paradise. My kind of paradise. Don't need wide oceans blue, or skies clear. Oh, there's only one who can take me miles from here. I found magic in your eyes. It's my kind of paradise. My kind of paradise. My kind of paradise. My sweet escape, my secret road, my getaway place. Nobody knows my hidden treasure in your eyes lies my kind of paradise. My kind of paradise. My kind of paradise.
Okay, my next guest has been entertaining us here in Northern Ireland for more years than I could ever imagine, whether it be in the popular cabaret club sound show band or being on the radio for many years as well. He's got a brand new book out, his life story, it's called Amazed, and I'm pleased to say George Jones is in the studio. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm amazed, just as the book says, that I'm able to come in and do lovely interviews with yourself.
Good to see you as always. I'm going to start by talking music because we've got a bit of a 60s theme going on this week with Chesney Hawkes and Gary Puckett on the show. And I said to those guys, and I know you're going to be able to talk about this as well, that when radio stations say they don't want the 60s music anymore, those guys have got it so wrong, haven't they?
Totally. I mean, if you go right back, and some people would agree, some people don't, you go back to the Beatles. The Beatles started a revolution in Britain primarily that was so needed because America, they held the whole franchise with the soul, with Motown, which wasn't a bad thing. But we needed, UK in general, or these islands need to put their stamp on something and say, this is our music.
Yeah.
The Beatles came back from Germany. I was there at the same time as them. And they were in the work camps from 8 at night to 4 in the morning. They learned this grinding sort of music and they brought it home. And of course, everybody, when they first started playing it in the cavern, they were poo-pooed it. You know, this is, because before that, bless his heart, it was Cliff Richard.
Yes.
And Cliff was all lovey-dovey and summer holiday and everything was hunky. Before that was all the ballads and the singers and stuff. But the Beatles had this rawness and they came out and they opened the doors literally to floodgates of groups saying, we could be like them. We want to be like them. We love that image. Let's start growing the hair and everything. Which meant that the 60s as a decade not only signalled, I suppose, the revolution in music, but together with it for some reason, it signalled an attitude of teenage life. They weren't sort of defiant or anything, but they felt they needed liberation. So that came out in the style of their hair. Carnaby Street, as you know, erupted with these new fashions that had to go hand in hand with the Beatles music and stuff. They set a whole new fashion trend, very like the jacket I'm wearing, etc., etc. So the 60s to me and that wonderful music, once it's forgotten, will be writing off a place in history that never needs to be forgotten. And I mean, you know it as well as I do, Robin, I've been doing the rock and roll years and dance hall days, even before that, 21 years of the showband show at the Waterfront. That was all 60s music. Every showband in Ireland played 60s music and everybody danced to it. So it's this longevity of a decade and indeed the music, which means that people like the Tremolos and the Searchers are still, people want to hear it. They love to hear it. And I keep saying to people who are complaining about today's music, today's broadcasting, you know, isn't it awful, isn't it great? I said, that's because we had the wonder years. And they were wonder years. I wouldn't have changed my life for anything. As you read in the book, I had ups and downs and helter-skelters and everything, but it was incredible, liberating years. It was really brilliant.
I'm going to take you way back to the start because you're always proud of your roots and where you came from. You came from East Belfast. As a kid, you were running around the shipyard and saw all these great transformations in the city, didn't you? At the age of 5, my father in the olden days was called a carrier, and I don't mean that from a virus point of view or anything. That was the name. General Carriers was on the lorries, haulage contractors, and he was contracted to lift stuff from the docks. And at the age of 5, of course, I was in the lorry with him. I wasn't at school, this wee short trousers and everything. And my father was the most laid-back guy you ever met, Robin. You know, I mean, he came up from the country originally, but he adhered to city life. And he became known as Big Geordie Jones. A joker, you know, a real joker, but nothing ever ruffled him. I've seen him, he'd sit with a cigarette and the window was permanently opened. Even though it was winter, he was sitting there and he'd puffing away and he'd driving the lorry at his own speed. And I've seen guys coming up beside him, belting out, "Where do you think you're going? Where are you going?" My father would say, "I'm going home from a dinner. Where are you going?" Just, you know, and I grew up with him. He was much loved down the docks, but that ticket to get down there at a young age and grow up in those amazing, because Belfast Port in those days, there must have been about 10 to 12 ships from the Queen's Bridge right down the whole quayside. Ardross and the Glasgow boat, you know, the Liverpool boat, they were from everywhere, Isle of Man boat, and they were all bringing, you know, haulage stuff in, and my father would arrive, drive the lorry right down to the, nearly right down to the water side where the cranes were. They lifted them out in rope, sort of nets, everything, but he delivered raw tobacco, raw sisal for the rope works, and he also picked up beer, crates of beer for the Irish Bonding Company from Whitbreads.
And then, as you probably heard the other night, he used to do things like flittings. They were called flittings. And I'd never seen a guy who could put a house contents on a flat lorry and make it stable just with ropes. You know, it wasn't a furniture lorry. There's no cover on it. You took your chances. If you want to have a flit and you looked at the weather, our wardrobe's going to get wet. And, you know, my dad says, you'll be fine, no problem. And I went on those as well. And he could maneuver a bed in through I've never seen anything like it. There were halcyon days, wonderful fun days. And it was growing up, learning. I suppose I learned the sort of working class side from my father.
Yeah.
And the comedy that came out in latter years from me was watching guys' characters. All right, that picture,
yeah.
you know. And I used to copy the voices and all and everything. And then on the other side, my mother, who came of a different sort of stature, she taught me manners.
Yeah.
And I mean, we hadn't much money at all, Rob, with no hot water in the house and an outside toilet. And it was awful when there was no newspapers, just shiny magazines. You know, I'll not reiterate that.
Well, you picked up the guitar, you joined various bands and stuff in the 60s. And I mean, you were hanging around with people like Van Morrison. And I want to know this, is it true that you once sacked Van Morrison from a band?
Van knows all about this. It was purely coincidental. The minute we had a band as such, even moving on from the skiffle group, we became an instrumental group, a la Shadows. There was lots of instrumental groups at the time, the Ventures, Dwayne Eddy, and we wanted to perfect our guitar playing. And Van arrived with a sax. Wow, it's amazing. We thought we were a big band, you know. But boys will be boys, and we all had a pint. We were, you know, teenagers in those days. But a couple of boys had this bottle of Drawbridge or Mondays or something, and they got stuck in it. And I wanted to run a tight ship to everybody. Say, we can't have that. Can't have people drunk going on stage. We've got to do a job. No. I says, Van, you shouldn't be doing that. I says, you have to leave the band. You know, blah, blah, blah. I says, you're not on the night. You know, and send them home. I mean, this is all, in those days it was all inconsequential. You know, not when you judge it by today's standards. But we all went, that was on a Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, midweek or something. And Saturday was a pilgrimage every Saturday, over to Crimble's Music Shop and into Isabel's Coffee Bar. And that's about as dangerous as it got. You felt you were hip if you were in drinking coffee all the time and all, you know. Then we went around to the shop with another 20 musicians in. The manager threw you out. Then you dwindled back in the next hour just to see the new guitars coming in.
Yeah.
So we got the corporation bus home and I walked on, and Billy McAllen out of the Monarchs and Big Roy was there, all back to Mal Jones's for a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Walked in, opened the door and says, where have you been? And I says, over, and she says, Van Morrison's here. That wee fella Van's here. And you threw him out of the van. He's been sitting here all day telling me the story. How dare you throw him out of the van? She gave me a smack across and said, no, you go right away and you apologise and let him back in the van. Pure innocence, you know what I mean? Van, we laugh about it now, you know, things like that. But those particular days, history was in the making.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you will read in my book, because I'm a committed Christian now for about 7 years, but the ghostwriter who was working with me, every time what we would have called a fickle finger of fate affected my life, it either meant I was going to be down and out or a big break. That's why it's called the Big Dipper, because I have been down and out and back up 3 or 4 times with the family. But there are things like God moments we spoke about. She called it a God moment. And one of them I want to just tell you about. Once we found out we had a rock band, we wanted to take on the world.
Yeah.
So we all gave our jobs up, and our parents were tearing their hairs out. But this Scottish guy had promised an agent he'd 68 weeks work for us. So instantly, right, I'm packing my job, and my father won't spare. I was working as a postman. Right. There's not such job for life. What are you giving that up for? And Billy McAllen was the same. He had a great clerk's job in a builder's yard, you know, in the office. Anyway, we all piled onto the Glasgow boat. The world was our oyster. Got on the boat, and Big Roy didn't go. He was working in the co-op shoe department, big cooperative in Belfast there. Blackie did, the piano player. So it was Blackie, me, Van, and Billy McAllen, and we were assured we were getting a singer in Glasgow and another drummer over there had all been laid on. We arrived there, and the agent met us at the docks. He says, I'm sorry, I've only a weekend's work. And we packed our jobs in. So that was the start of the greatest adventure of our lives, Robin. We did the gigs. He got us a couple more. We started to leave. We were living in his council house in Puckett in Glasgow. 6 guys with his wife, his wife's mother, and 4 kids in a council house.
Wow.
Thank God it was the summer, and we used to all go out and practically sleep in the garden. They would set up all the gear, we played in the garden, all the neighbourhood came round, watched us in the newspapers, everything.
Of course, 52 years later, Club Sound would still be on the road, but sadly, it's going to be the last year, isn't it?
Well, we felt, I suppose the kindest way we could put it is we feel we've left our generation behind, Rob. You know, I mean, young people who were like yourself, who were reared on our comedy, even they've got a bit older now, and it hasn't passed on to their children, really. So, but look, we've had a fair crack of the whip. You know, we really have. We can't complain. I don't think there's any other bands lasted 52 years. The City Hall, I think, are giving us a reception to thank us for playing through the Troubles. And primarily, that's what we did. We didn't realise the impact that we had in the Troubles. And all we wanted to do was make people laugh and make people enjoy good music. And we also always wanted to be different than any other band. And we set our ways and always being that. Jack Rogers, who was our manager, taught us to be like that. Be professional, don't copy anyone, just be you yourselves. It flew us to Carnaby Street to get about different sorts of suits that nobody was wearing, and this was it. And of course, guys come up to you and say, why do you always get a crowd? I said, that's because we're professional. I used to say, but that was it. But little did we know at the time, especially in the Railway Bar, which lasted 3 years. The impact that we had on making people laugh is probably the proudest thing that we have felt, Robin. And we know it now, but unknowingly we didn't know it then. Yeah. You know, we were just Club Sound. But we brought heart and a bit of light in the darkness. And the places like the Railway and other clubs, we had Catholics and Protestants sitting together, laughing together. And the story I told the other night about the 2 anthems we brought out, Peace the Time Is Now, and The Way Old Friends Do. At the end of the night, everybody, we didn't ask them. Yeah. They just felt the words were there. So we always made it the last song of the night. And they stood up like old lang syne. And they were in different alcoves. They probably hadn't spoken all night. They were hugging each other. The yearning for peace, you know. So if ever there was anything we did in our times, we made people laugh and we brought hopefully a bit of hope for peace. And in 52 years, that's probably the best accolade that we could wish for, you know.
Brilliant, George. We're sadly out of time. I'm going to get you back on the Christmas show this year. We'll pick up on some more stories. Absolutely. But in the meantime, if you want to read more, that's the book to get. It's called Amazed and it's out now. George Jones, thank you so much.
It's on, if you don't mind me saying it, it's on Amazon. Yes. And it's in most faith mission books. And the last line I'd like to say is, if I've covered everything in it, if you like it, share it. If you don't like it, there's enough pages to light the fire for a year on it. Okay.
George, good to see you as always.
You too,
Thank
Robin.
you.
Thank you so much.
Right, time now to meet another music legend who's on tour with that Solid Gold 60 show, which is coming to Belfast and Derry. I'm pleased to say Gary Puckett joins us on the line. Gary, how are you?
Hello, and good day to you. Nice to be here.
Good to see you. So let's talk about the tour first of all. When you first started out way back in the 60s, did you ever imagine that all these years later you would still be touring and still singing all those big songs?
Well, honestly, I wasn't sure I'd even live to be this age. But, no, I did not think that I would be doing it all these years later. But I've been blessed with lots of fans who continue to love the songs, the records, and my voice. So I get to go out there and be with the fans and sing the songs and, just have a wonderful time.
And as these tours continue, you must be picking up new fans along the way as well.
Well, I do. I notice younger fans, and I always ask them their age, and it's neat to see the young people enjoying what we do and what we did,
Now, I was saying to Chesney earlier on, the guys who run radio stations these days don't think the 60s music works anymore. But judging by the numbers that you guys are doing on the tour, they've got it wrong, haven't they?
I believe they have. In America, we have XM radio, Sirius XM, and they have many, many, many channels dedicated to everything from 50s to 60s to 70s, 80s, 90s. And all the political talk and all the sports and, the music that we made back then is, I speak to Flash Phelps frequently, you know, on 60s on 6, and it's now called, I think, Gold 73 or something like that. But it doesn't die, you know. Yeah. I think it's going to be around a long, long time. And you know, the younger people sometimes I think want to pass on it, but there's so many young people that really love the music of that era. So I'm grateful for them.
And what about a song like Young Girl that has lasted the test of time? When you first went into the studio to record that song, did you realize how big it was going to become?
No, did not. But, you know, I mean, we were now riding the crest of the wave that Woman Woman had created. So we were feeling good about things, you know, and I thought that it was a good song, that it was singable, that it was fun. It's been a misunderstood song for many years, or I don't know if it's just misunderstood or people just wanting to look in and find the dark side of it, you know. But the guy in the song is honorable, and he said, hey, you let me know that you were old enough to give me love, but it's not the truth, so you got to go away, you know. But no, I didn't realize that I'd be out here at this age, you know, and I'm glad to be doing it, because what else would I do?
Now, what's your memories of that period, recording those great songs in the studios? Because you had the famous Wrecking Crew with you, guys like Hal Blaine and people like that, didn't you?
Yes, many of them were there throughout our entire recording career. Sometimes the names slip my mind, but Hal Blaine, Carol Kay, Larry Knechtel, Howard Roberts, who was really well known as a jazz guitarist, you know, and many others, Jimmy Gordon, who, you know, has went over to the dark side. I don't know if you know about Jim, but he was a great drummer. Many others, Mike Dacey, and they were not known then as the Wrecking Crew. That was a name given to them later on, and I'm not really sure why, because it sounds like a negative name, but those guys were the A players, you know. Yeah. They were the number one people in Los Angeles. If you were going to make a record, didn't matter if you were going to make that record with the Monkees or Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, you know. They were there. They knew how to read. They knew how to interpret. They always were creative minds, and made those records fantastic, you know. So yeah, it was wonderful working with them all.
Now, what about your band, the Union Gap? You were famous for wearing these American Civil War outfits, which really made you stand out. Whose idea was that?
Well, it helped, I gotta say that. It was my idea, because prior to that, I was thinking about how competitive the business was and is. It'll always be competitive. Everybody wants to be king of the hill, you know, there's no doubt about it. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. Everybody wants to succeed, whether it's a donut shop or, you know, a record store. So you know, I was trying to figure out how we could break the barrier, so to speak, you know, and find somebody that would champion the cause, because that's always been the case, I think, for almost anybody in the business. You want to find somebody who says, hey, you sing great, you sound great, you look great, I've got a great song, you know. And that's kind of how it worked out. I was thinking about what we were wearing in those days, and I'm not sure, but I think it might have been the same in the UK. You know, bell bottoms and hip huggers and beetle boots, and, you know, the tie-dyes and fringes and leathers and things like that. And I thought, you know, and that's when ripped up jeans started to become popular, you know, and everybody was wearing it on the street, on the stage. And I thought, you know, maybe if we had a visual image, there would be somebody out there who might catch on to that, you know. So when I had discovered Jerry Fuller at Columbia Records, who was newly hired to write and produce, you know, he was hanging a gold record on his wall when I walked in his door, and I said, excuse me. And he turned around and said, come on in the door, you know. So I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm putting up a gold record. I said, I've never seen one of those up close. May I take a look? He said, sure. So I looked at it, and it was a record by Ricky Nelson called Traveling Man. And he said, I actually wrote this song for Sam Cooke, but Sam didn't want it. Ricky did. And it sold 4 million copies, you know. So I said, please look at my portfolio. So he looked at the portfolio. He liked the outfits. He liked the sound of the band. He liked my voice. And he came to see us in a club that we were working in San Diego called the Quad Room, which was in a bowling alley, which is a whole other story about us first dressing in our Union soldier outfits and having to go into the bowling alley to go into the nightclub. It was rather comical. But back to the other subject, yeah, I kind of negotiated, if that's the right word, with the record company to put a picture of us on our first record. And they wouldn't for a while, but finally they relented and said, okay, we'll do that. And they put a really nice, the photographer found a school that had been demolished by the wrecking ball. But the stage in the auditorium was still standing, though everything was crashed down around it. And he used that stage as our stage for the photo. And they did it in sepia tone. You remember the old brown tone that, yeah. And it was very authentic, except for a couple of inside jokes that we, you know, were just being silly young men about. But the photo really was a good and sort of enduring, attractive photo. And there was a disc jockey program director in Columbus, Ohio, who was a Civil War buff. He was a Civil War historian, you know, and he looked at the picture when he first got the record in his hand. He said, this picture is fantastic. He said, I wonder what the record sounds like. So he listened to it, loved it, put it on the station. I think it was WCOL, and it went to #1. So that's when Columbia Records regional office, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away from Columbus. It's in Cleveland. They called me in San Diego, where I lived at the time, and said, do you know that you have a #1 record in Columbus? I said, how could I know that? You know? And they to promote this record. So they made plans. And of course, we went back there, and they put us to work in a nightclub in the basement of the Sheraton Hotel called Otto's Grotto. And it was, you know, kind of a silly name, but it was a very hip club. And there was a disc jockey there by the name of Dick Kemp. And he came to the club and would broadcast while we were, you know, performing. And it was a lot of fun. And that's where we saw the record jump onto the Billboard charts at somewhere in the 80s.
So it did. Things took off, and in 1968, you actually sold more records in America than the Beatles, didn't you?
Well, that's what the history books say. I always tell people they were just having a bad year, and you know, they were going through a lot of stuff in those days. I can't imagine that we truly sold more records. What I really think it is was single records, because we had 4 really big ones that year, and I think sold going on 20 million copies of those 4 singles, you know. And over the years, I have found out that Woman itself is over 15 million copies, you know. So they were significant records, and well thought of, and you know, so yes, I guess we sold more records than the Beatles.
Now, when you were growing up, there was always music around you, but is it true that your family didn't want you to go into the music business? They wanted you to become a dentist.
Well, yeah, it's not really true they didn't want me to go into music, but that's sort of true. I'd say that's pretty along the lines of, they felt that, see, they were both musicians. My mother was an accomplished pianist. My father was an accomplished saxophonist, and that's how they met. Right out of high school, they were both in a big band called the Dick Halverson Big Band, and they met and fell in love. And in those days, you know, we're talking about the middle 40s, tour buses were not a polite thing. They were very cold, very drafty, very uncomfortable, not a good way of life. And they opted for a normal way of life, because they wanted to have a family and, settle down and all that kind of stuff. So that's what they did. But they were musicians, and they loved the idea of having all of their children be musically inclined, so each one of us were, at first, me, my sister, we were put at the piano and said, you're going to learn how to play the piano. Well, when it came to David and Brian and Chrissy beyond that, well, you can choose an instrument if you prefer. But that's where it really started. But yeah, they wanted us to go on, all of us to go on to higher education, which my sister Kathy did. She became a teacher. My brother David went on to, he also wanted to become a teacher, but then became disenchanted with, I don't know, something, and did not go on. But they just wanted us to do better than they did. I think that's what all parents want. Let's encourage the children to go on to higher education and find something that'll really make them successful and really be able to save for the future, So, but I just had it in my head, somehow that I tried 2 years of college, took all the, what do you call it, the required courses, that you had to take before you could take your electives. And I was a good student in some ways and not a good student in other ways, because things that I was interested in, I excelled, and things that I wasn't interested in, I didn't, So I, through those 2 years, found myself working in the teen clubs and things like that, being in bands and stuff. And then when I turned 21, immediately went into the nightclubs and, that way of life, which I found to be exciting for a while. But yeah, anyway, first my folks didn't like it. Then they started coming to the clubs where we worked, and kind of supporting us. And we were good bands, we sang well, we played well. And so my folks were proud of that, and they encouraged, that kind of thing. So, and then when I was able to put it together to make some records and have success, then they became extremely proud of the accomplishments and, that kind of stuff.
And I think already throughout this interview, we've given a few clues away as to what age you are. You look fantastic. Do you have a regular fitness regime to keep fit and healthy?
Well, it goes way, way back actually to the early 70s. I'm lucky to have good genetics to begin with. My whole family, there's a long lifeline in both sides of my family. So that's a good start. But there came a point over in America where I forget exactly what it was, but I think that it was just the cost of meat in like 1972 or 3 just doubled, arbitrarily. And none of us as young people really understood that, and I just thought, well, that's wrong. And so we boycotted beef, that kind of thing, And so it kind of set me on a path of looking into health in general and nutrition in general, and found myself really researching at some point and finding out the truth about chemicals, the truth about salt and sugar and pepper and, all the things that end up in our foods. And so I started drinking a ton of water. That's, I think, one of the secrets to health success is drinking about a gallon of water a day. I know that's difficult for a lot of people, but I used to carry a gallon bottle with me everywhere I went. And people would joke on it, and say I was kind of foolish, but that's just what I did in order to keep the inside of my system clean. Then there came a point in my life where I really got into exercise. And I've always been athletic.
Now, what's life on the road these days? Because Chesney Hawkes was telling me when all you guys get to Belfast, it's going to be one big party.
Well, I have to be honest about me. I'm not really a partier. I like to enjoy the company of all these guys. They're all talented, very nice people. But I've just never been one to go to the pub regularly. I'm kind of a withdrawn and quiet sort for the most part. So my preferred drink is red wine. A glass a day is about my limit, maybe 2. So I don't really party as such, but I'll join the party for the first 20 minutes, if you know what I mean. And then I'll say, excuse me, but I'm looking forward to being there in Belfast and, having that experience.
Now, when you walk on stage to perform songs like Young Girl and Lady Willpower, is there still a great feeling walking on stage to do that?
It is, because the people continue to love the songs. They know them word for word. All I have to do is go, lady, and hold the microphone out, and they just start singing.
Yes, yeah.
It's a wonderful feeling. Sometimes people say, well, how can you stand doing that? Look in the people's faces when they're smiling and they're singing. You gotta love that.
Well, Gary, it's been great talking to you, and we look forward to seeing you in Derry at the Millennium Forum on the 5th of November and at the Ulster Hall here in Belfast on the 6th of November. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Love all you folks from the UK and Ireland, so come see us.
Right, that's nearly all we have time for on the show this week. A big thank you to all my guests. We're going to finish off with some live music and here with another track from his new album, Animal. And remember as well, he plays the Empire on the 11th of November. Here is Gareth Dunlop. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Time creeps up, whispers in your ear, tells you all the things only the older souls hear. I want you held high, with a fire in your heart and a pride deep in your eyes. Smile, smiling, smiling. When the last of the leaves are falling from the tree, you're on the last lines of your page in history. I want you to have given your all, to say that you got back up after every single fall. When the lights stop shining, there's no rewinding. Life's as fast as light. So when you look back smiling, look back smiling. When you look back smiling, look back smiling. When there's more up behind you than there is up front, the hunter in your heart is almost finished up the hunt. I want you like a man untamed, like a lion in the wild looking over his domain. Smiling, smiling, smiling. When you're on the last rotation going round the sun, steady as she goes on a journey almost done. I want you to have had more than your fill, to have taken every chance the way I know you will. When the lights stop shining, there's no rewinding. Life's as fast as light. So when you look back smiling, look back smiling.